Hey everybody, how are you all doing? Welcome to
Good.
episode 2 of WTF USA. As anyone who's ever done content creation, which is a lot of people now, know that this is a process and we're learning how to do things a little bit more. And I think we're getting there, guys. I think we're getting there.
We're
Yeah,
getting there. I noticed in that intro, Steve, which is a great intro, it only has Tim's name on it. Did you guys
No,
see that?
your
I
name's
don't
there
think
too. You got to
Where
look
is
at it.
it?
It's there.
Where on the same screen?
Yeah. It's like on a little piece of paper or something. I made sure.
Oh, right. Right.
Why don't
It
we
goes
just
by really
change?
fast though.
We could change the name of this to "Oh, Poor Me" if you like, Sancho.
I was just going to say Tim's name always sticks out to me, so maybe that's why I saw it bigger and bolder.
It's not unsurprising, mate. You're not the first person to say that. Police, courts.
I only know that for
partners.
sure because I was worried about that because that's what I only saw. But it's weird. Like it gives you all these different prompts that you have to, you can add text in, and I know for sure
Right.
it's there. I'll just have to slow it down and see where it's at.
All good, all good. But
I'm
guys,
all
great to see
inclusive.
you again. It feels like forever since we recorded the last one, and
Yeah.
I think we're all glad to get back in and catch up with each other. A lot has happened, and I'm excited. I'm excited to discuss it all.
Yeah, there's
absolutely
so much going on. I mean, we could do this every day, but that would be ridiculous because everything changes. So,
Oh my gosh, the news never stops.
Never
never stops.
Yeah. So our first topic that we're going to talk about is tariffs, lawsuits, and meltdowns.
In which order?
As you know, Trump has declared Liberation Day, and essentially threw the entire economic community in the globe into a little bit of an upheaval. It's actually kind of interesting to me how powerful, love him or hate him, Donald Trump is absolutely the guy in charge because all he's got to do is say something and the market reacts like that. That's a pretty powerful dude.
Yeah,
Right or wrong. And
wrong.
so
it's wrong. I mean,
Well,
one person shouldn't have that much power.
yeah, that's scary, actually. It's a really good point.
Mm.
So as we know, he slapped a 10% universal tariff on anything that the U.S. imports, and then kind of played a little bit of a game with each different country. So I'm going to start with you, Sanjay. What do you feel is the theory or the reasoning behind this? Why do you think he's doing this? I know that you're a Trump supporter, and I'm curious to get your input on that.
Look, it's Trump genius at play. He really this is the end game here is China, right? He does not want China to grow any larger than they already have. He believes that they have taken American manufacturing jobs, and therefore the American standard of living has declined. And the only way he knows is to fight. And so he's put the whole world into this tariff debate. And you can see very quickly he started negotiating with other countries. And he's a businessman. He's willing to negotiate with China. But they are also a very strong country now. They probably do not need the US. They are very self-sustainable, more so than the US. And so it is a battle of wills and a battle of, very strong, charismatic leaders of each country. I have heard some theories. I mean, my personal theory is that where the globe has been centered around US and the US economy, in the future, we're going to see a kind of a two-system economy, global economy going forward. There will still be the US power. It'll be a concentration of global economic power, and people will trade with the US. But China will emerge as another concentrated power that people will want to do business with, and they'll have their region and their countries that they do business with. So it's a changing of the guard. It is the world and its economy is changing as we speak. Very uncomfortable for a lot of us. But I think in order to save the decline of the US, Trump is doing what he had to do.
It's interesting. I'm going to kind of play devil's advocate here. To me, I feel like the idea that jobs have been exported is a little bit outdated thinking, in the sense that the jobs that are, I'm sure you guys have seen the video. I'll find a way to slip that in our podcast. Have you seen the video that China put out? Yeah, and I think that's kind of the point, is that, are there Americans that want to work in manufacturing? I think that's the basic question, because the premise behind all this is to bring manufacturing back, but there's
Only
a
the
reason why
illegal ones.
manufacturing left in the first place.
Only the
What'd you say,
illegal
Tim?
Americans. I said only the illegal Americans will do those jobs.
Right, which are being pushed out. So that's why, for me, I really do try to look at things very pragmatically and very neutrally. And so from a neutral perspective, business-wise, it seems like it's shooting yourself in the foot, because you're pushing out a lot of illegal immigrants. And I don't disagree with that. I mean, you should be legal to be here and work and pay taxes. But the simple fact is, there's a big group of people that handle farming and a lot of physical labor that a lot of Americans don't want to do, theoretically, but also the same thing with manufacturing. Or,
Steve,
am I underestimating the American work population?
I think that's what a lot of us are doing. I mean, the US is a large country, and we're all city dwellers to a large degree. We've become used to going into cafes and buying coffees and maybe working in tall buildings. But when you get out into the middle of the country, unlike Australia, where no one lives in the middle of Australia, in the middle of the US, particularly Trump's base, whether it's people living in caravans or people who lived in Detroit building cars, or they still work in steel mills, there is a large manufacturing population. Now, it has always been done in a far more industrially advanced way than China or India. So there is always more machinery involved in US manufacturing. But US manufacturing is a large industry, and I do believe that there are Americans that will sit there and put together things and sew clothes and do all of those things. All Trump is saying is, China, you can sell to us, but now let the little, the young girl who might be ordering on Temu or Amazon in her bedroom, let her decide on price. This one's made in the US and this one's made in China. They're the same price. Now you decide, as opposed to this unfair advantage which currently exists.
But the unfair advantage is based on what? The fact that China has cheaper costs.
Correct.
And the only reason the manufacturing in China has been blossoming is because global, not just America, are buying cheap, well-manufactured products because they want them. We're consumers. So two things I've heard through the last week. First, I don't know which of the top tier of the Trump people said this, but talking about bringing manufacturing back into the US, and then quite quickly talking about automation, AI will be making things so much easier. I'm thinking, well, hang on, that's actually not increasing jobs, maybe more specialized jobs, but isn't that taking away other jobs, more hand build sort of jobs? And I think there's a massive misconception certainly I've dealt with this myself because I've been into China. Their manufacturing is at the same level as anywhere else in the world. I mean, they are very sophisticated in most of the things that they build now. So it's illogical to think that there will be industries regrowing in the US. And the secondary to that with the tariffs is that you're talking about how much export. I'm not sure what the deal is, but I think it's 10% of all exports out of the US goes to China. Is that right? Or comes US imports into China are 10% of their. What about these businesses that are already building and manufacturing and servicing out of the US in an export market? What's gone on now is that people are now looking at the American manufacturers who already exist, like Boeing, classic example, and saying, well, you guys are too expensive now. We just don't want to deal with you. You're too volatile. So when people like Trump make these decisions, they really need to be aware of the 10 other things that spring from that. One is it's very debatable that manufacturing will grow in the US. Very debatable. I mean, I doubt that you could prove that to me. Secondarily, export companies that have a majority of exports out of the US, like places like Boeing, Defence Force, these sorts of things. Yeah, sure, they've got internal contracts. They've now just been basically kicked out of the world market, and there will be alternatives in the market to replace their products. Secondarily, big retailers, Walmart, I don't know all of the retailers in the US, they thrive and survive, Amazon, off the good quality, cheap products out of China. Not just China, other places. Vietnam is another one that got smashed. So those industries won't be replaced in the US. Yes, there will be some pop up, but let's be honest about it. Global trade has happened and won't stop. So why be isolationist?
What do you guys think should happen to Chinese companies that steal American IP?
Well, my IP was stolen in China. I had my coffee carts, which I was building in China, setting up my business over there. I basically got told in a strange kind of way, copyright in China means the right to copy.
Correct. That's correct.
So, but Japan has done it. All these other countries are doing it. At the end of the day, and you would even know from Australia, how many people here have to move their manufacturing out of Australia because it's too expensive. China is, yeah, they do. They copy. That's what they do.
Right.
And I think you'll know in business, that makes no difference.
So what makes you think that they're not going to or haven't already planned on copying Boeing?
Oh, I would, if I had yuan, I'd put it on now to say they already are.
Right. So
what they'll do? What? Sorry. Yeah.
What is wrong with Trump protecting those US industries?
But he's not.
But he is, because Boeing is protected, as in their manufacturing will be protected in the US. You won't be able to buy a cheap Chinese plane when they start making them.
Yeah, you will. I mean, I think there's a bit of a, like, I look at, for example, Boeing has just been, all these countries are saying we don't want your planes anymore. Who's getting the orders? The Europeans.
The idea is that it'll be the US domestic economy will.
Well, that's okay. You can be in isolation. America could be an isolationist if they wish to. That's completely that. If that's the reason of the choice, that's fine. That's protectionism. Great. No one's against protecting your own industries. I'm not against it, but I'm realistic to realize that this is a global world now, and the fact of life is. Sorry.
But it's not about the rest of the world, is it, Tim? I mean, do you think Australia is going to buy planes from anywhere else other than the US, even if they're 10% more expensive? Where are we going to sell planes from?
Well, Europe makes them.
What about
the Aerobus?
What about when the Prime Minister sits down and tries to negotiate with the US President, just like they did with the submarines, where they spent billions of dollars to buy submarines from the US? Why will they not continue to foster that relationship and pay more?
Well, they might, but you've got to remember though, prior to that AUKUS thing you're talking about with the submarines, Australia had a deal with France, which they
reneged on it. Yeah.
So they can always renege on the US one and go back to France. See okay, how do I put this in? I'm not that bright. Bear with me. Is that you've got a country that wants to be protectionist and isolationist. Well, the rest of the world doesn't want to be. They want to be open to trade, and alternatives will always be found. What America does now is not anything more special than what other people can do. Defence Force. So many countries, from what I've been seeing, are saying, look, we're not going to buy anything from the US anymore. We're going to buy it from South Korea, or we're going to buy it from Germany, or we're going to buy it because... Yeah, maybe it won't be quite the same quality as what's available now, but it will be, and it's cheaper. So, tell me what the real goal is. You're basically stuffing your economy in the US if you're going to be isolationist.
So my whole thing is that this is not a global trade issue. This is a China trade issue. I don't think he has any plans to affect the rest of the world.
Well, if that was the case, why didn't he just do? Well, why did he just do tariffs on China if that was the truth?
Well, that's effectively what he's done.
No, they had a whole list of countries that had tariffs anywhere from 10% up to 70%, I think.
Which are paused for 90 days, and he's negotiating, right?
Well, Canada's still being reamed. So is Mexico still being reamed. EU being reamed.
If he doesn't like the leadership, he reams them. That's what he does. But you mentioned South Korea. Mm-hmm. South Korea needs US protection against the North. They're never going to, just like Australia, just like Taiwan, they're always going to be beholden to US power and US defense machinery that they will always need to buy.
In the short midterm, maybe that's correct. But I still don't understand how that relates to tariffs. I mean, for example, I know, was it 2 weeks ago, South Korea, Japan, and China met to discuss, a free trade area. So what does that tell you?
That tells you they're going to trade between each other. But
does that tell you that they don't really care about whether the US is in the background where to protect you? Their greatest adversary and scariest proposition in Asia is China. So, and I also saw just the other day that Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia all had trade visitations over in EU to start trading more with the EU. So what's happened with this out-of-mouth conversation about throwing tariffs on there is that all it's done is said to people, we can't really rely on the US anymore. Yeah, it's a biggish market, but there's bigger markets. So we need to make sure that we're not beholden to US under the guise of, you better do business with us, we're the biggest market and we'll protect you.
By the way, who's got the fighter jet going over your house?
Funnily enough, I'm not too far from where the F-35s are.
Probably a US-made plane, huh?
It is, F-35. And if I was in government, I'd be cutting it out and going straight to Europe.
I think you're underplaying the importance of the US. I think you're dreaming if you think people are going to run towards China instead of the US. Just like we discussed last time, you had Harris or Trump. You have a two-sum game. You have a choice to make between the US and China. It is not, we're going to come up with a fourth and fifth superpower and people can start cozying up to them. And so I think the US has a lot to gain from this. Yeah, I think there are a couple of countries you mentioned, Mexico and Canada, where there are still issues and may continue to be. If you have a leader that doesn't want to deal with someone like Trump, then that will be difficult to resolve. But the real horse in this race is China, and are they going to come to the table? It's going to be very interesting. I wonder whether behind closed doors there are moves already being made. But in a communist government, what you're going to see is that if Chinese factory workers lose jobs, and there are stories out of places like EU in the Guangzhou district, which is a large manufacturing area, of 40 to 50% of factories being completely closed, staff being put on leave until further notice. Mm-hmm. That will drive people to really protest. And Xi Jinping, I think, has a big decision to make about whether he can handle that. And that's the only way that he's going to be forced to the table. I think when you're a communist leader, you're running on different ideals and values. So it'll be an interesting few months ahead for sure.
Well, there's two things to say there. Yeah. Firstly is that from the US perspective already, they should be looking quite closely at how they're actually allowing bigger markets to build and negotiate without them. I mentioned before Japan, South Korea, Vietnam's also now, who are major adversaries with China. They're talking to China. I mean, what US is actually doing by default is actually allowing China to be more communicative with lots of other different countries around the world. I'm not suggesting that places like Australia go, we love China, you can come over and take us over. Not at all. Of course, they're not going to do that. But more importantly is that US has now become a fluctuating geopolitical proposition. EU now, they've decided, yes, they've been listening to the rhetoric from JD Vance. You guys are lazy, you guys are slack, you guys are horrible. You need to do more for your military. We're not going to help you anymore. Well, they are. What's the spin-off of that? They're not going to be buying weapons, machines, planes, anything from the US in the future. Well, maybe some. They're already gearing up all their own industrial base. So you tell me how that's going to help an American in the Rust Belt.
I totally disagree with that. The Italian Prime Minister was with Trump just a couple of days ago and was jockeying for a deal. So she invited him to the EU summit, and I think you're going to have maybe individual European countries will step out. But I'm actually interested to hear, Steve, your perspective on, when I mention this American IP being stolen, you see it in any range of products. A product, particularly in the product space, you talk about Walmart, Tim. If there's a product that reaches $5 million in turnover, the Chinese copy it like that, and it's on American shores at 1/5 of the price.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that? That's really R&D that Americans have spent money on and are never able to recover.
Well, let's, for our audience sake, and quite honestly, I'm not smart enough. Let's talk a little bit about what IP is first. It's intellectual property, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I can, from the industry that I'm in, I've seen it happen all the time. And a great example was one of the companies that I worked for sold under-counter refrigeration that, it's an American brand, a wonderful brand that's been around for a long time, over 100 years. It's a family-owned brand. And as I was out selling it, I ran into that all the time. It was very well known that you could get just about anything you want, especially in the food service world, that is less expensive coming from China. That's very common known. But the other commonality with that is that there is absolutely a perspective or perception rather that it's a lower quality product, which is interesting. And and I know Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank, this was his major issue about the Chinese stealing IP.
That's true.
So, but is there not trademark or not copyright, but isn't there trademark protection to prevent that? Or is it just a matter of them saying, okay, we're going to put this wire over here, and now
there's a thing called the Madrid Protocol, which covers a lot of countries, including China. So, for example, if you put a trademark in Australia, a patent more so than a trademark, I mean, patent being something that's physical design or whatever, it's generally covered. US is not part of that. US has got its own separate IP proposition. So arguably it can't really complain too much in some ways. But, I hear what you're saying, Sanjay, is there's no repercussions. If you go to China and say, don't you dare steal my patent.
It's too difficult to enforce. Yeah.
But like a lot of patents are, like I won't tell you too many details, but I know of a Taiwanese company right now who's developing a special microchip that actually helps boost audio. So, for example, for some strange, and don't ask me how it works, but it actually makes audio clearer, higher, better decibels, whatever the case may be. Well, you and I both know what will happen. Or three of us will know that we know that will be poached, copied, redone in China. Now, the Taiwanese will have, obviously, I don't know what the dealings across that little bit of water is all about, but they might be quite prepared to allow that because they know they'll get economies of scale, blah, 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 whatever. So it's just the nature of the way China works. And don't make the assumption that China's not innovative anymore. I mean, look at AI.
Yes, absolutely. The answer to your question, Steve, is it's often too expensive to enforce, And even if you have the money, there are large
proof.
companies. I remember seeing there were fake Apple stores popping up in China.
Yeah.
With the complete logo and, you know, silver products, MacBook copies and stuff. So even the really big guys, there have been stories of fake KFC stores in China.
Oh, they're there. I've seen them. They're fantastic looking.
If you're backed by, the answer is, if you're backed by, you know, someone powerful in the Communist Party, you can basically, no one can touch you. Doesn't matter if you're Apple.
Yeah, it's true. So, you know, back to why. I mean, okay, it's a problem, but the solution isn't throwing tariffs on American consumers, because basically it's a sales tax, the tariff, isn't it?
Well, is it a problem or is it theft?
It's theft, but you know how do you rectify it?
Well, you punish the thieves, right?
How do you do that?
But
by putting
tariffs
by putting tariffs on your own consumers,
right? That's the problem. And I get it. Carrying that same example of the under-counter refrigeration, now anyone that imports that refrigeration is going to be 145% more expensive based on the tariff.
Correct.
So at the face, it fixes that, and the idea would hopefully be to make people pivot and go, okay, well, I'm only saving $500 now instead of $1,500. I'm just going to buy the American one.
Right.
And in some cases that'll work.
You say that it hurts people, and there's no doubt there's short-term pain with tariffs, but it helps business owners. And as both of you know, business owners like that family company that came up with their own refrigeration model, they have been struggling with this for years. They deserve a break. They deserve to sell more product. They've got their own R&D and IP and high maintenance costs and minimum wages that they have to deal with. So while there is, you know, the general consumer population that will pay more for some products in some categories, there is on average a lot of businesses that are you know, having to compete with importers that will do better. So it's this real balancing of the economy, or rebalancing of the economy.
Well, what about, I mean, for example, how many businesses in the US take advantage of the low price points out of China?
Plenty.
So are they not important?
Every business is important, and every American is important. But
so the reason these businesses flourish and do so well is because if we're just going to stick with American consumers demand those products. They buy them.
True.
So
sorry, Steve, just quickly.
No, I interrupted you. I apologize.
I'm not against tariffs, mate. Not at all. Don't get me wrong. And you've got to protect your industry, especially the burgeoning ones, the new ones, yeah? But you do it in a different way. And so going out there and just blasting the world, which is what has actually happened, and then literally pulling back. I mean, I even heard something before we got to school about how now Donald Trump's being all soft on China, and it's going to roll back, and we all know why that is. That's internal pressure in the US from big retailers, from all Amazon, most likely, I don't know, I'm not in the room, saying, come on, hang on, do it slowly, do it tactically, do it cleverly, so that we actually can get this right. China is all about losing face. We've done business in China. We all have. We know the worst way to deal with a Chinese company is to say, nah, whatever, you're useless, you're bad, you're horrible, you're ripping me off. Well, what they'll do is they will most definitely go to their way to rip you off.
Yeah, I mean, when your coffee cart was stolen, Tim, your coffee cart idea or the design, I guess people started importing it into Australia. Was it direct?
I was getting them made here with a company, but that company was just ratcheting up the price as more and more people demanded them. they adapted to the market by increasing their profit, by increasing the price. So remember, the design came from me. I drove and I gave it to them. I wanted the economies of scale in Australia. That's my objective. Why did I go to China to get them made? I could get the same quality product made for 25% of the price landed.
Yeah.
So did I give them I gave them the IP.
Yeah.
Because that's
There's no doubt.
my deal.
We even had, when I used to be in the costume industry, initially when we started buying, Halloween costumes, we were buying them. They were made in the US, and some of them were licensed. They were Mattel or Disney costumes, which were very popular at the time. And slowly we saw them move their manufacturing. Sometimes they would move to South America, where it got a little bit cheaper. Then it moved to China, where it got a lot cheaper. And especially for us here in Australia, we would buy direct out of China.
Yeah.
But now the Halloween costume industry is absolutely smashed. There is no such thing as licensing. If you go onto Temu, you can buy the same thing we used to retail for $80 for about, 1/4 of the price and have it delivered to you sitting at home. So businesses have chased this cheap manufacturing. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
My question for Steve really is, Steve, without telling us your age, over the
95.
last 50 years,
he's forgotten his age.
Global trade has proliferated all the world's economies. Has the US standard of living gotten any better?
I think so. Well, depends on what facet of that standard of living you're talking about. I mean,
because
how about disposable income?
Having more cheap shit in your garage doesn't mean your standard of living has gone up.
It's about disposable income, isn't it? Has your
the
disposable
80s
income increased?
Well, it depends. I mean, again, we could get into a 3-hour discussion about how you measure that.
Well,
but just an off-the-cuff answer, I guess, Steve. I mean, do you think when everyone was driving American-made cars and American-made clothing, and most of the products were from the US, and US notoriously they rarely traveled outside of the US. There was mainly domestic travel. Was America thriving more then or now?
I think America was definitely thriving more. I mean, if you look at the 50s and the 60s, just economically speaking, not necessarily social issues or whatever, because that's a whole different kettle of fish. But I think that it was definitely a better time. I think family was it was much more reasonable to have one typically. I mean, the mother usually is the one that stayed home with the kids. The father went to work. There was always a vacation every year. The suburbs started growing and things like that. So for sure, I definitely think that the standard of living in the United States has devolved significantly since then. But there's a lot of reasons for that.
Sure.
Partially is I feel like we're absolutely getting to the point where the middle class is getting squeezed out, and the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and that gap is growing. This is why I will never run for president, because I have no idea. I mean, I'm critical of Donald Trump, but at the same time, I have to say, maybe there's logic behind this that we don't see. I personally don't see it, but I can see what you're getting at.
I think if you've got no idea, then you're absolutely perfect to be president.
But I do want to bring up something that's really interesting. I want to go back to this example that we had, because I know specifically of an organization here, and I got to be very careful because I don't want to say something I'm not supposed to say, because technically millions of people could see this. But I know that there's a manufacturer here, a U.S. manufacturer, that has products made. I'll just say that they're in the oven category. And they make their oven. They have a plant here, but they also have a plant in Mexico. And they compete against these Chinese replicas that are coming in, that the least expensive. But the products that they are bringing from Mexico into the United States have the tariff on them. They're eating that tariff because they don't have the ability to be as competitive already. I mean, competition's growing, and they had a fierce competitor that's just having great success. They're already fighting that, so they couldn't reflect that onto the American people. So two things were going to happen. It's either going to hurt the company and they're going to lose money every time they sell one of those appliances, or they pass it on to the organizations that buy these, and typically it's going into restaurant kitchens, hotel kitchens, and whatnot. The option of producing it in the United States is limited because they could not. It's a really interesting case study I'll send to you guys. They couldn't produce as well and as quickly and as efficiently in their US plant as they can in their Mexico plant for whatever reason. Maybe it's unions, not sure. But that's a major conundrum, because prior to the tariff, they were doing great. That was the best part of their product line. They were selling more. They're well-made, well-manufactured. The really interesting, I mean, where they're having it produced is just it's like a 2-hour flight from Dallas, Texas. So it's just really interesting to see. Like I could see why they're doing it, because the encouragement would be, well, then don't have them produced in Mexico, produced in the United States. They were having trouble finding enough people. And I can specifically say that during COVID, they lost a lot of their workers, not getting workers back. Nobody wants to be in the physical manufacturing business unless you have to. I shouldn't say nobody, but many don't, which is why they got pushed to manufacture in Mexico in the first place. So what do you do in that case? The tariff hurts everybody in that case.
Yeah, it does, and I mean there should be exemptions, right? I think if I was Trump, I'd be coming up with a very quick way for businesses to apply online and tell a story like that and get an exemption.
That would be smart.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to see.
Or just go back to the agreement between Canada, America, and Mexico.
Or that's another way to do it. Come back.
Which is what I think was signed off by Donald Trump, wasn't it? So.
Yeah. But here, if you had someone applying for exemptions, who's going to review those when DOGE is cutting 30% of the federal workforce? Who's going to? You're already now taking this funnel of work and you're putting less people in place to get that work process. Now you want to add something to it. See, it's tough. It's a tough situation. I don't envy any of those people.
I just think the strategy of what's happened, rather than just go big bully, bash, throw it all out there and see what sticks, would have been much wiser if the objective was simply to build a manufacturing base back in the US, was to literally cherry pick the tariffs and the countries that were actually in some ways had a competitive advantage over you because of costings, and just do it that way. I mean, that's logic. That's smart, isn't it? In my opinion, anyway. I mean, lots of countries do that to protect their especially agricultural products and things like that. I mean, we know in Australia, when we made some comment about COVID, where it came from, I won't go into details. What's the first thing they did, Sanjay? They just turned around and said, no, there's 100 million% tariff on beef and wine, and bang, and those went on and on and on because they could, and we just had to cop it. So I think America's doing the same thing. It's unfortunate that these economies are so big and they just feel that they can bully people.
That's what worries me, because if I am the head of state of any other country and somebody like Donald Trump is basically bullying me into making a decision, and if I have other alternatives, I'm going to go to those alternatives first. So if I can buy my warplanes from China, whatever, instead of the United States, I definitely would consider that, because nobody likes to be pushed around and bullied.
No,
that's the fly in that ointment.
And I think this, the kind of the carte blanche tariff actually affects a lot of very poor countries, and like Vietnam and Cambodia, these countries that fundamentally do a lot of obviously textiles and things like that. These are very poor people, and I think there's a humanity in that's missing in a lot of these decisions in the US. China doesn't care about their manufacturing base. We know that. That's a communist country. We all know that they don't, although they might be losing some manufacturing plants and things like that. Yeah, the elite don't mind. It doesn't affect them. It's the same as Donald Trump. It's exactly the same. So it worries me a little bit about the fact that that poor people, and even in the US, poor people, you know, like they're the ones that seem to be forgotten by a lot of these kind of off-the-cuff remarks and these reactive responses. And it's very easy for people who have got $1 billion in their bank account to say, don't pay Social Security. That person, no.
Yeah.
That just worries me that the checks and balances aren't there. And, you know, I don't know whether the strategic economic brains are there anymore, either in the US and other countries, not just the US.